Hello. This is part 5 of the Cosmic History series that I'm putting together. And in this video, we're going to touch on Pharaoh Ahkenaton and some other Egyptian history, as well as the 3 Christs. So, we are starting off with the sphere of amenti being released from Dimension 4 by the Elohim in 2409 BC. And this particular period of time is in accordance with Earth's natural time cycles. So remember that the sphere of amenti holds important evolutionary blueprints for the Earth's morphogenetic field. And it has been previously stored in the Dimension 4 bands since 9540 BC. And this was due to some premature descension after the Atlantean cataclysm. So this was when the frequency fence was put into place and Earth went into a period of quarantine. So, because this release occurred, we were able to readjust the 7th through 12th base tones of the 3rd dimension, and we were able to re-enter the 8th through 12th base tones into Earth's morphogenetic field. So at this time, the sphere of amenti can enter the frequency bands of Dimension 3 until the halls of amenti open again. And remember that the halls of amenti are the means of souls being able to ascend back to the planet of Tara. So we were in further need of an avatar with a 9-dimensional frequency morphogenetic field who would release the Anu Melchizedeks from the Templar seal, and who was also meant to help quickly raise the frequency of Earth's grid, which would enable the sphere of amenti to release completely into Earth's core. And this individual became known as Pharaoh Ahkenaton, who was originally named Amemphis IV, and he was born in Thebes, Egypt, to a Ceres Egyptian father and an Anu Melchizedek mother in 1398 BC. He began the atonist movement, which was in alignment with the Law of One. And his birth sparked the opening of the Ark of the Covenant again, and the further descension of the sphere of amenti. The blue flame of amenti also descended about 12 years later, and this was embodied by a Melchizedek cloister flame holder, who also became the high priest of Akhenaton. And side note, the Melchizedek cloister soul group incarnated simultaneously with Akhenaton for significant purposes, of course, and they acted as keepers of the flame. And the halls of amenti also reopened in 1374 BC after the frequencies of the blue flame had stabilized within Earth's grid. So the Giza pyramid is still under the control of the Ceres Egyptian lineage, which is not so great. The general Amonist priest caste was not informed of the opening of the halls of amenti because of some distortion and abuse of power that was happening. The Amonists were not in line with the Law of One, but by the age of 24, Akhenaton is taken to Inner Earth by the priests of Ur and trained in the process of ascension. He was also instructed to relocate his seat of power from Thebes to Tel El Amarna, where he constructed the city of Akhenaton, which honors the Aton God and the Law of One. Here, there were also portals that connected to inner earth, which led to Giza and the Ark of the Covenant and the halls of Amenti, etc. So Giza, Thebes, and Jerusalem are all connected through these portals of inner earth. And they are hundreds of miles apart, but through the portal system, these locations could be accessed within minutes. And they could also go about the business of ascension without drawing the attention of the priesthood. So the Anus were brought to Tel El Amarna for ascension training, and then secretly taken to the lower chambers of Giza, where they could pass through the halls of Amenti and return to Tara. And several thousand people were successfully trained and ascended here. Unfortunately, Akhenaton began showing favoritism towards the Anu races and prejudice towards the serious Egyptian people, which was not what had been set up in his soul agreement. So the priesthood of Ur and the Elohim interjected and proceeded to conduct ascension rituals in secret. They were actually able to successfully ascend several hundred individuals without Akhenaton knowing, and they were able to make their way into the inner council. But eventually, Akhenaton discovered the activities of these keepers of the blue flame and sentenced many of them to death. So the Elohim ended up placing individuals under the protection of certain serious Egyptian priests who had been permitted to know about the secrets of Amenti. So there was a certain series of events that led to a final confrontation beneath Giza between Akhenaton and the Keepers of the Blue Flame. Akhenaton attempted to close the halls of Amenti using the staff, but a flame holder was able to transmit Dimension 5 frequencies into the sphere of Amenti to counter the transmissions of the staff. So there was an energy duel of sorts that was taking place here. And the energetic barrier around the sphere of Amenti ended up collapsing, which opened the Dimension 2 portion of the morphogenetic field and triggered the release of many chaotic soul fragments from the underworld into the sphere of Amenti. So the Elohim intervened and resealed the sphere of Amenti, but the contaminated portions of the sphere of Amenti remained opened, and the halls of Amenti once again had to be closed. Everyone who was involved in that major event had their memory erased, including Akhenaton. The Elohim and the priests of Ur tried counseling Akhenaton. They couldn't necessarily tell him straight up why he wasn't okay to keep ascending people, because he didn't remember what had happened, and he perceived their suggestions to be evil. He was confused, he feared treason, and he continued ascending souls through these portals that had been contaminated by the chaotic forces of Dimension 2. He was unaware that he was sentencing them to soul fragmentation, and his half-brother Sabatoth was also ascending people without the knowledge of what had happened. So the Elohim began transferring these ascended souls into the third eye of Horus, which was located on Sirius B, and they put them under the Templar Axion seal. There was about 1,000 souls that would have to eventually repeatedly reincarnate on Earth until they reassembled their fragmented portions of being. And unfortunately, the seal was passed down through the lineages and became looked at as a curse because it caused that misalignment in various portions of the morphogenetic field. It was intended within the greater plan for Earth that Akhenaton's son with one of his wives, Anki, would be next in line to rule. But because Akhenaton was so distressed and not ruling effectively, people conspired to have him killed. And his first wife, Nefertiti, joined forces with those conspirators and assisted Akhenaton's uncle in assassinating Anki and his son. Akhenaton was later assassinated, and Sabatoth, his brother, was imprisoned and tortured for knowledge of the secrets of the Ark of the Covenant, and eventually killed. So Tutankhamen was placed in power in 1340 BC. He was 8 years old, and he was sort of acting as a puppet pharaoh. He was under the influence of Haramhab, whose initial goal was to integrate the belief systems of the Atonist and Amonist people. At first he was in line with his commitments as keeper of the blue flame, but eventually he succumbed to different ways and abandoned the Atonist. So after the chaos of Akhenaton's reign, there became a division between the guardian races, which is something that you don't want, right? And the Elohim and the Syrian Council began favoring the Anu Melchizedeks and the Hebrews, which caused a major division with the Ra Confederacy. The Elohim and the Syrian Council began influencing cultures to adopt the distorted Templar Creed, and they wanted to control women breeders, implement the notions of the male elite and interracial discrimination. They had basically given up on the rest of the human population, whose genetics were tainted, and by pushing these ideas, they could control the course of interbreeding, and their lineage of humans could be kept genetically pure. So the Anu Melchizedeks and the Hebrews became known as the chosen ones because they had this privilege of ascension. The Azarite family of the Ra Confederacy and the Pleiadian Star Council, as well as the Andromedan and Arcturian federations, made a plan to realign the morphogenetic field of the sphere of amenti. They wanted to reintegrate all of the removed races and prepare humans for the opening of the halls of amenti. So in order to do this, they established the Essene brotherhood, and this was to bring back the Law of One teachings. The biased Elohim eventually took over the Essene brotherhood and started promoting the Templar Creed again. And so rifts became apparent between the differing Melchizedek families. So the original Melchizedek priesthood was founded in what is today Jerusalem. There was an E.T. Nephilim brought to earth from Nibiru in 1979 BC, and he brought knowledge of ascension and genetic protection to the Hebrew, Hibiru, and Aryan races, and he became known as Melchizedek, the king of Salem. And with the establishment of the priesthood of Melchizedek came the foundations of modern-day Jewish religion and the mystical studies of the original Kabbalah also sprouted here. There were two primary divisions in the Essene Brotherhood that came about. The first being the Templar Melchizedeks and the Hebrews, and they were influenced by the patriarchal Elohim. These were also the descendants that still carried the Templar seal from 8000 BC, but were still taught to believe that they were the chosen ones. And then we have the blue flame Melchizedeks, whose morphogenetic field remained in the sphere of amenti, and they were in charge of protecting the Ark of the Covenant and holding the secrets of amenti. They also promoted the science of ascension, reincarnation, ET ancestry, unity consciousness, etc. All right, so let's talk about a couple of Jesheuas. The first being Jesheua 12. This was an avatar who incarnated on Earth with a 12-dimensional frequency morphogenetic field, and this was done in order to help realign the sphere of amenti. He was intended to bring together split factions of the Essenes and re-enter the original Templar Creed. He was a pure Taran Turanusium soul, born outside of Bethlehem to Judai and Johias in 12 BC. So Jesheua 12 was born to blue flame Melchizedek parents. It was a couple chosen by the priests of Ur, and it wasn't actually an immaculate conception. It was a traditional birth. The personages of Mary and Joseph were not the parents of this avatar. They were the parents of a 9th level avatar soon to follow. And the 9th level avatar was born from an ET Nephilim conception, but the Elohim later labeled it as an immaculate conception because they didn't want the general human populations to have knowledge of ET ancestry. So we have Jesheua Melchizedek, who is also referred to as Jesheua 12. He was taken into the custody of the priests of Ur in infancy. And on the other hand, we have the Elohim, who also orchestrated the birth of an avatar, but with a 9-dimensional frequency morphogenetic field. And this man became known as Jesheua as well, so he is referred to as Jesheua 9. And this story is the one that is recorded as the birth of Jesus in the contemporary Christian doctrines. Through the centuries that followed the births of these two avatars, the life stories of both Jeshuas, plus another man who was not an avatar, became consolidated into one personage called Jesus Christ. So let's focus on Jesheua 12 for a moment. The Hebrew and Melchizedek morphogenetic fields that were sealed away in Alcyone were able to be reintegrated into the sphere of amenti with the birth of Jesheua Melchizedek, or Jesheua 12. He also helped realign the portions of the sphere of amenti that had become trapped in Dimension 2 as a result of Akhenaton's reign. And for these deeds, he became known as a savior to the Jewish people. After he studied in Persia and India for a while, he was taken to Egypt by the priests of Ur, and while he was between 20 and 33 years of age, he orchestrated ascension for various groups directly through the Ark of the Covenant with the blue flame Melchizedeks. And most of these ascension activities remained hidden and under the guise of a mystery school at Giza as well as other locations. And even though the halls of Amenti were closed, the energy field of a 12th level avatar could carry the energy fields of others through the seals on the sphere of amenti and back to Tara. So the Melchizedek and Tibiru cloisters, plus the Hebrew essenes, were appointed by the Azurites to guard the Ark of the Covenant, and their descendants are the ones today that carry the full 12-strand DNA package, known also as the silicate matrix. So the silicate matrix is distributed at random throughout present-day genetic lines, but mainly found in Hebrew, Melchizedek, Aryan, East Indian, and Tibetan racial lines. It also occurs as a recessive gene that remains dormant until the activation of chakras 8 through 15. And this was able to happen because the Zionites were sent back in time during our present-day Zeta infiltration to realign certain ancestral groups, including the followers and descendants of Jesheua 12. And these people became a part of what is known as the celestial human lineage. All right, let's switch over to Jesheua 9 for a moment. He was also taken to Egypt for initiation and ascension training. And some of those rites were actually conducted by Jesheua 12. But Jesheua 9 traveled through Nepal, Greece, Syria, Persia, Tibet. He trained in various faith doctrines, and his teachings were the ones that became a bit more well-known. And his teachings also caused more persecution from the Romans and some of the Hebrew and Templar Melchizedeks. And at 32 years old, Jesheua 9 and Mary Magdalene, his wife, and their 3 children were exiled to France. There was also a man named Arahabi who was led by the Elohim to believe that he was the true Jesheua 9, and he was actually the one that was crucified. And this crucifixion was meant to divert attention from Jesheua 9 and his family lineage. So neither of the 2 avatars were actually crucified. The resurrection was also orchestrated by the Elohim through the use of holographic inserts. But Arahabi was actually resurrected following this holographic display, and he ended up living another 30 years in India. So interesting stuff. The teachings of Jesheua 9 and the Templar Melchizedeks are what became the primary foundations for contemporary Christian and Jewish faiths. But the Jewish religion did not acknowledge Jesheua 9 as their savior. Jesheua 12 was the true savior of the Hebrew people. So there were plans to perpetuate the Jesheua 12 lineage, which carried the 12-strand DNA imprint, and there were 6 couples that were chosen to serve as guardians of these children. There were 6 women of the Melchizedek cloister subraces and 6 blue flame Melchizedek adoptive fathers. So the descendants spread throughout various regions, some within the French aristocracies, others within the Celtic, Egyptian, and African genetic lines. 5 of these children ended up surviving. The lineage of Jesheua 9 also prospered and spread through many nations. Jesheua 9 traveled to Tibet eventually and ascended out of matter in 47 AD to harmonic universe 3. And this was done with the help of the Elohim. The teachings of Jesheua 12 were originally included in the manuscripts that became the Christian Bible, but were later distorted and edited almost entirely at various times to suit the needs of the elite and their evolving political religious machine. And eventually they were banned by early Christian churches because they spoke of extra and meta-terrestrial groups and divisions within the Templar Creed. Very few of the original Jesheua 12 teachings have survived into the present time. There are remnants secretly preserved in France that will one day be discovered. Jesheua 9's teachings were also heavily distorted over time. Jesheua 12 ended up leaving Earth through the Ark of the Covenant in 27 AD at 39 years old. He ascended back to Tara and has since evolved far beyond the confines of physical matter. So the Ark of the Covenant was resealed into Dimension 3 following Jesheua 12's ascension. There was to be a waiting period until Earth's grid could rise enough vibrationally and the sphere of amenti could return more permanently. The Elohim, the Templar Melchizedeks, the Blue Flame Melchizedeks, and some others have assisted humans in preparing for ascension. So most present ideologies focus on conscious evolution, DNA activation, transmutation, etc. And even though some genetic distortions have remained, most of the race morphogenetic field was reunited and returned to amenti via these two avatars. So now, when the halls of amenti did open, souls could ascend if they had assembled the 4th and 5th DNA strands. And although teachings differ and are seemingly contradictory, and although they have been manipulated by man and ET intruder forces, all major Earth religions were seeded by guardian groups, and they are united through their original purpose of achieving ascension and freedom from the illusions of matter. The promise of ascension is the hidden heritage and legacy of the human condition. It is the fulfillment of humanity's evolutionary blueprint.